of the Alder work group to develop logistics and operational details for MPD independent civilian oversight.
And I will call the roll. Alder Moreland.
Here.
Alder Badar.
Present.
Alder Kemble.
Here.
We have quorum.
Okay. Tanya, would you like to read us the instructions?
Yes. Okay. To members and city staff. Members, if you are able, please activate your video and keep it on for the duration of the meeting. Staff, if you are able, please activate your video when you are speaking. The chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak, ask questions, or request a roll call vote. During any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted briefly. Staff, click raise hand when you are asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order in which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Members of the public who have registered to speak, the name you entered in Zoom must match the name you entered in registration. You will remain muted until called upon. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. After speaking, a member of the body may ask you a question. If you need to share documentation with the board, please send it to the email listed on today's agenda. Chair, the floor is yours.
Okay. So I'd like to entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the June 25th, 2020 committee meeting. Alder Kimball?
Move approval of the minutes.
Second.
Thank you. Okay. I don't vote, so it's approved unanimously. Is that correct?
No, we decided you do vote.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Unanimous vote. Okay. We're moving on to disclosures and recusals. Any committee members have anything to disclose or recuse? Okay. Now we're moving on to public comment. I'm going to turn it over to Karen.
Okay, let me get my timer ready. And we have we have two registrants to speak on the public comment item. We'll start with Alexandra Wilburn, neither supporting nor opposing, wanting to speak.
Am I unmuted? Hello?
All right, yes. And
fantastic. Thank you so much. I called in neither support nor oppose, just basically saying that, I mean, yes, I do support the civilian oversight as it's being set up. I think it's really important to keep in mind that one of the big reasons that we need is because of, it's not just general corruption. We have to keep in mind that it is white supremacist ideology and policy put in place because of that white supremacy ideology that is the cause of the ability for corruption within our law enforcement and general government institutions and other institutions as well. So I want, stringent sort of who can be on the committee to make sure that they are majority Black people, as we've seen white people spearheading trying to dismantle white supremacy has gone very poorly. And then I know there are some the other people that worked hard on this, so I just wanted to thank you for your advocacy. And then any other older people or elected officials or members of law enforcement themselves that read or come across this when looking into what's going to be set up of the civilian oversight, that This is actually the bare minimum and should have been definitely put in place immediately after, immediately after Matt Kenny killed the first person that he killed and then received a Medal of Valor later. Because, you know, there are older people that are listening, using your voices, like your platforms. Yeah, you might not be able to fire Matt Kenny, but make sure you want it to be known that Matt Kenny is not welcome on the police force. And I personally believe that it is a malicious evil to support, to like, oh, we need to build support with our police in our community. How is that even a thought that can occur while Matt Kenny, who lynched a man, there's no other way to say it. He lynched someone because he could, whether when it was in his heart with skin color or not, because he could, is on the force. It is like philosophically, morally incompatible to let's set up trust and Matt Kenny is still on the force. Again, thank you to the older people that are like really advocating and working on getting civilian oversight. And with that, I yield my time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexandra. Next, we have Luis Yudice.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Luis Yudice. I'm a former member and co-chair of the Police Ad Hoc Committee. I'm also a retired assistant chief with the Madison Police Department. I had the honor of working with Chief Noble Ray. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak and to share some thoughts with you. And thank you for the important work that you're about to undertake. But just some thoughts that I'd like to share with you. It's a given that we're going to hire the Civilian Oversight Board soon after the creation of the Independent Monitor's Office. It's an important first step, but it must be done well in order to be successful. When this issue was first considered, I consulted with late Professor Herman Goldstein of the UW Law School, who expressed some concerns about creating another layer of accountability and advocated that a better route was to improve the PFC process. His concerns were about diluting the police chief's authority, but also his responsibility to investigate officer misconduct. And he felt strongly that a system with a judicial process was needed. So that's an important concept that should be included. It's clear that the community wants greater accountability of its police, but both the Monitor's Office and the Oversight Board should be governed by the rule of law. They must respect due process and apply procedural justice principles to their work. My personal comments pertain to the selection of the board. It includes some of the following questions, comments, and suggestions for you to consider. The city has not yet identified specific board member qualifications and desired experiences. Will selection be based on an individual's relevant experiences in law, civil rights, and criminal justice, or based on more subjective criteria? Udi Offer, who is the director of the ACLU's Justice Department's National Political and Advocacy Department and the former executive director of the ACLU in New Jersey, wrote an article titled "Getting It Right, Building Civilian Oversight Boards to Oversee Police," in which he advocated that board members should have an interest in the safety of the city and in the civil rights of community members. Nominees should have an expertise in a relevant field such as legal, civil rights, or law enforcement background. Nominees should have demonstrated commitment to the well-being of the city where they live and a strong understanding of the importance of upholding civil rights and civil liberties in policing. And I believe that makes a strong statement towards recruiting board members that are going to have strong qualifications to be able to debate these very complex issues that will come before you. But another question is, what will be the length of term of the board members? And how will we ensure that they truly represent all segments of our community?
That's your time?
I'm sorry?
Is the body okay with a couple more minutes? Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Yudice?
But the other question is, what's the vetting process? In order to evaluate the objectivity and the ability to adhere to the rule of law and respect due process, will it include a review of the potential board members' past experiences with police, such as criminal histories and social media posts? What's the process for removal of board members due to lack of attendance or misconduct? And ultimately, who has this authority to do that? To be successful and to establish legitimacy, the board will require extensive training. What are the estimated costs and budget implications of doing this? And have you been or will you be in contact with other communities that have oversight boards to learn what has worked and to ensure that we don't repeat their mistakes? And last, what issues have resulted in litigation and what lessons can we learn from this? For example, in Newark, a superior court judge removes subpoena and investigative powers from the board. The work you are leading represents a critical step forward, but it must be guided by solid research and facts. I urge you to create meaningful and lasting change by proceeding carefully and thoughtfully, and by employing good methodologies. I recommend that you work with the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement. The acronym is NACOLE, and it's spelled NACOLE, which has extensive expertise and should be consulted before selection of board members. And last, recognize that the police need to be a part of the change process. Give them a role. The vast majority of Madison police officers are good and decent people who are dedicated to serving their community. Partner with them to help define the future role of policing in Madison. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yudice.
Thank you. Next, we have, let me refresh just in case. Just want to make sure. That's all for registrants who wish to speak. There were 2 registrants who support and not wishing to speak for that item.
Okay. All right, so we're going to move on to item 5. And I asked Sarah.
Alder Kimball has her hand raised.
Hang on. Alder Kimball?
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Yudice. Your comments were very dense. Could you please, and it seems like maybe you have written them, could you please send them to us? Because I couldn't take notes fast enough and we really want to consider them. So
Yes, I will be happy to send those to you. Should I send them by email to whom should I send them to?
The 3 of us alders, or do we have a general email for this group? Karen, can you say what that is?
Yes, we do. It's Oversight WG at cityofmadison.com. Oversight, like SIGHT.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I'll forward my comments to you.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Any other questions for any of our registrants? No?
And I'm sorry, Alder Moreland, we do have, we have 3 registrants on number 5, but they are all in support, not wishing to speak.
Okay. Awesome. So I asked Sarah to come and join us because at our last meeting, we were talking about the logistics of setting up meetings, frequency of meetings, and how we will house documents for ease of public access. So we had a nice long conversation, and I wanted her to come to share her thoughts with this group for us to move forward with how we're going to handle documents and the logistics of either live streaming or broadcasting. Sarah? Oh, let me unmute you. There you go, Sarah.
Good afternoon. So when Alder Moreland and Karen and I spoke, we talked about, I'm going to break it down into a couple different things. The difference between a type 2 and a type 1 meeting. I know that Alder Bidar and I have had intensive and extensive conversations on that over the past 3 or 4 months. And then what this meant for the different work groups that the Common Council is moving forward with, which this is splendid that we're doing this, and how IT could support that. And then also how documentation could be presented out to the public. So let's start with the type 1 versus the type 2. So this is a type 1 meeting. You have Tanya facilitating as well as Stefan. And then Karen is just running the meeting with Tanya. This seems like this works well for those types of meetings where there's heavy participation. And I can imagine that as you move forward, you're going to have more participation, and that it would make sense to get the assistance of IT staff in facilitating these. Karen did express a lot of interest in having us assist her if we could. For us to do that, however, it means that these meetings would have to work within the schedule that we have already set with all the other type 1 meetings that we have. So Common Council Executive Committee, the Finance Committee, Common Council Plan Commission, Urban Design Commission, Board of Public Works, and I know I'm missing a couple others, but that's part of that list there. And then if we're going to do this, usually we ask for at least 1 week so that we can make sure that we get this scheduled and that we get staff in place to be able to assist. Tanya just happened to have some open time as well as Stefan, and so they were both able to help facilitate this meeting today. This was not a burden for them for this meeting, but it could be for other ones. So as Alder Moreland and I were talking about this, I was thinking that there's a couple different solutions for how you could do the public participation, kind of thinking outside of the box here. And one of them was recommended by Tanya, who also does the Dane County Board meetings and covers those. And she had shared how Dane County Board meetings, they'll have one meeting where they have public participation. And so the whole meeting is where residents come and the public comes and they participate in their feedback. And then the second meeting after that is where the Dane County Board actually does the work of the committee and has those conversations with each other, but they're not interacting with residents at that time. So they're taking all of what they've learned in the previous meeting. They're getting the opportunity to do research if they need to read the emails that they get in, to do follow-up if they want to ask staff to do more research and to do all of that. And then they're able to come back to that next meeting and then really have the conversation at hand about what they're talking about in regards to what they heard in the previous meeting. So that's one opportunity and how we can handle it. The second idea was to actually just do public participation meetings, like public meetings, public information meetings. So we could handle those as type 1s. Again, you can do a lot more opportunity if like you wanted to break out into smaller groups. We could do that. If you wanted to do polling, we could do that. And it might open more opportunity up for conversation. So those were two ideas that we had for how we could help with moving that conversation ahead. So that's the first part, which is how to handle virtual meetings as we do more virtual meetings. And then the second part was the website. What I'm recommending is that because this is a President's Work Group off of the Common Council, that this should just be a page off the Common Council website. And then we link to Legistar, because we always ask you to put all of the relevant information into one place. I don't know how many times I have seen something over on some other page and they didn't continue to update that page, and so their information is outdated. So we can have Karen then linking back and forth and linking to the Legistar legislation, the legislative files, the agendas, the minutes. We would have the work group and the list of who's on that, like how we do, where we just pull in from Legistar showing who the alders are on it. And then you can have your meeting dates. You can just link over to the calendar. So again, all of those meeting dates stay current. And then if there's other documentation and resources that are not going to be attached in Legistar that you want to take a look at, if it's looking at other previous work groups and the documentations that came out of there, then Karen can list those in there as well. And so it's just one complete picture. And this is basically the the jumping off site to then all of those other resources. So that's what I have for you. Questions? Alder Kimball.
Alder Kimball?
Yes. So I think those two options you mentioned for public participation are not exactly what we were looking for. I think we were anticipating that former members of the ad hoc group would participate here. So we wouldn't just be collecting opinions, we would actually be engaging with people who have knowledge on these topics as we make our decisions. So I'm wondering if there's a way that attendees can raise their hands, or is there a way that people can register and say they have substantive comments on, item number 6 or 7, and then we bring them in as panelists. And if there's a concern about video security, we can keep their video off. Those are just some ideas I have. But I think the intent is to actually engage in meaningful back and forth with people who have, expertise and information on the topic we're working on.
Okay. So, I hate to try to come up with solutions on the fly. That's just not how I work. I work better if I have here's what we're looking for. So, this is great feedback. And then hearing from Alder Vidar, and then I can get from Karen a whole thing, and then I can sit down with the media team and we can talk out how we could see this working so that we make sure that these meetings work really well for your participants. Because I'm concerned that we'll come up with a solution and it won't do what you want.
Alder Kimball, a follow-up?
Well, no, just that, we want a more free-flowing conversation with participants. I mean, that's what we've said we were going to do. We've done it before in other in-person meetings, and I understand that, there are technological barriers for us doing it, but that really is the intent. And just on the website, thank you so much for your suggestions and for getting that up and going.
Alder Vidar?
Thank you, Alder Moreland. So I'm wondering again, Sarah, I know you want to kind of think about it, but I'm also wondering if there is a hybrid way of doing it. So maybe kind of a mix between what a public information meeting or an Alder meeting looks like, which is kind of participatory by nature, people intervene, ask questions, get answers. So maybe I think it's what we're looking for is probably closer to that model. So that's one piece. And then I did want to comment on the website. Thank you so much for your suggestion and work on that. My one and only thing, and again, not to be resolved right now, is that part of the reason that we wanted a website is that, as you know, and I get what the barrier is, but Legistar files are not easy to navigate. And as we add more and more documents to a Legistar file, it becomes harder and harder to find what you're looking for or to have them in any order. So I'm also wondering then if you think that it should always be linked to Legistar, we should really be thinking about multiple Legistar files that have actually some more detailed name to the Legistar file than any information about oversight committees, because it just becomes unwieldy. Even already, I was trying to find one document, and it's and I knew what I was looking. So, anyways, just maybe a better system for for Legistar, even if that's what we're going to refer back to.
Let me interject real quick because I can't raise my hand because I guess my settings are such that I'm not. So let me just So from what I understood, that IT was working on a way for us to be able to register, to have people register, so that when we suspend the rules, we'll be able to call on them. As far as I understood, that was the case. If that's still the case, Sarah's nodding. So I do think that we will, when that's completed, we will be able to proceed with suspending the rules in line with what everyone voted on last time and what Alder Kimball is describing, I believe. The other thing is that I've been working on trying to put the files in Legistar in multiple places. So we have a repository, which is the documents, just all the documents that we're going to be doing. I put them in there, and item by item number. So specific documents and specific items, so that you don't have to go through all 20 of the documents to find the 5 that are relevant to the item number at hand. I can also keep working on that, and more suggestions. I'm happy to implement them.
Thanks, Karen. Sarah?
So I'll follow the instructions that were scheduled shared at the beginning of the meeting on raising hands. Sorry. So for registration, Karen is correct. We're making new changes to the registration application. It takes 2 teams to do that, because we got to then, once we make the changes on the website, then we have to go and change the back end so that the PDF report that you all get that shows everybody that's registered, that goes to a different team, and we need to make sure that we get that working correctly. And we're hoping to have that done by Friday. So that's the goal for that. As far as Legistar, I think that the more that you can be organized with it, the better the searching is. So I embrace that, because I know that when I'm in Legistar looking for things, when they're not well named, it is hard to find them. But the other thing that Karen can also do is on the webpage, if you have it so that you want it by subject matter, if you want it by date, if you want it by category, whatever it is, Karen can then link directly to each one of those. So that should help with some of this. So we don't have to just link to the whole details page for all of the legislation there. Karen will be able to link individually. So that should also help with some of that if we help her to get that set up.
That sounds like a good plan. Any additional questions, Alder Kimball, Alder Badar? Okay. So Sarah, do you think we'll have something to take a look at? Maybe not at our Friday meeting, but a meeting that we will hopefully have scheduled next week?
For the webpage,
Mm-hmm.
I think we can work with Karen on that. I don't know. I have to say I am down 3 staff people on the web team right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, I am way down on my staff right now. And so it's the same group that is working on getting that registration set up. And it's not just for this president's work group, it's for the entire city, for all of our meetings. And I would prefer that they continue to work on that so that we can get that done. So I think that would probably be a next week project, but I can certainly talk to them and see.
Okay. Alrighty, I'm sure we will talk prior to that, just to kind of stay informed. If there's no other questions, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item 6, developing a work plan and timeline.
And we do have one registrant wishing to speak.
Okay.
That is Gregory Gelem, who is here. And I will start your 3 minutes.
Hi. Actually, before I get into what I was going to say, a couple other thoughts. It just occurs to me that one easy workaround, and maybe this is not sufficient for allowing people to participate in the conversation. One easy workaround is simply emailing or messaging somebody, like Karen or Donna Moreland. That would be the equivalent of like raising a hand. And a separate point that I wanted to raise, like Louise earlier mentioned the Newark board, and I wanted to provide some clarifications because I thought that was important. With the Newark board, after the board was established, the police union sued, and sued based on provisions very specific to New Jersey statute, like not more general provisions of law or due process. And when they sued, a state Superior Court judge stripped various powers from the board, including subpoena power and the power to investigate. The city of Newark then appealed, and a three-judge appeals panel heard it. And the appellate division basically completely reversed the initial judge's decision and restored the ability to issue subpoenas and the ability to investigate police misconduct. Then the police union appealed that to the state Supreme Court, and then oral arguments were made on April 27th, and the state Supreme Court has not yet issued a decision. So I thought that information was probably important because, you might have been left with the impression that there was a suit and, and powers were stripped, and that's the situation that currently exists. And that isn't. Like right now, they do have the power of subpoena and the power to investigate, but the police union is appealing that. As far as the work plan, I'd suggested last time, and people may have much better ideas, but like my suggestion was, because the ordinances are so fundamental, to start with the ordinances, start with the ordinance for like the independent monitor, then potentially like the ordinance for the Civilian Oversight Board, then perhaps the job description for the independent monitor and the budgetary stuff. So that was my suggestion for that, and people might have much better plans. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any questions for the registrant? Okay, thank you, Dr. Glimbiet. So I guess we want to get into the discussion of, I guess just to remind everybody, especially the registrants, we have 4 charges for this committee, and we have 5 weeks to get it done. So it's going to be really important that we want to encourage public participation, but we really want people to be concise and clear so that we can hear what you're saying and act on what you're saying. So we want to start on the work plan with a timeline, and I tend to agree with Dr. Glimbiet to start with the ordinances. I'm willing to hear from my counterparts to see how they feel. Alder Kimball?
Yes. Yeah, I generally agree with that. I think what we should do now is look at the calendar and work backwards from August 7th. Was August 7th the Common Council meeting? When's that date? 4th, August 4th. So work back from that and have active, invite the city attorneys into this discussion now to talk about how long they think it will take to draft language. So we, right before this meeting started, we got a couple dozen emails from people asking us to implement these recommendations exactly as written. And I think we should not spend time re-discussing in depth what the ad hoc committee has already studied and learned about, although there may be a reason why we should, touch on some of the rationales, but we have committed to basically translating the language and the recommendation into ordinance language. So it seems straightforward, but I know legally it's not, because this has never been done in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has, our own set of state statutes that we have to adhere to. So I'd like to hear from the city attorney's office, without doing any sort of original in-depth research on other people, other cities' ordinances, but just using other cities' ordinances as a reference in terms of the principles that the recommendation is written around. how long do you think it would take to get a first draft of an ordinance that, maybe either one encompassing ordinance that creates the entire civilian oversight mechanism, including the independent monitor and the civilian oversight board, or two separate ordinances, one that creates the independent monitor, the office of the independent monitor, and one that creates the civilian oversight board.
Okay. Attorney Strange or Attorney Paulson? You're both unmuted.
I said to John earlier, how are we going to do this with you on the line? Who's going to talk?
Yeah.
So are you thinking, Alder Kimball, you want to introduce at the August meeting? Is that
Yes, the August 4th meeting.
okay? So the question is how much time do we need going back from August 4th?
No, how much time do you need starting now getting a first draft out?
Just based on
Just based purely on the language of the recommendation.
1 or 2 weeks, I would say. John, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if it's
details we need, but
yeah, I think if it's as simple as taking the recommendations and putting them into an ordinance, and referencing some of the other cities that have similar that's consistent with those recommendations, it would take too long. I mean, most of these ordinances are not they're 2-3 pages maybe, which is not super comparatively speaking. So that's probably Marcy said a week or two. Probably, to get a rough draft that is just to work from, probably a week would be enough time.
Okay. So we could,
I don't want to overpromise.
Next Monday, we might have a rough draft to work on.
yeah, we could come up with a draft by Monday.
By Monday, sure.
Weekend for sure.
Just a reminder that if we meet on Friday, turn around and meet on Monday, we're at a very tight 2-hour window between 2:00 p.m. on Friday and 4:00 p.m. on Friday to get the agenda in. So,
well,
it will just be a challenge.
We could post 2 agendas this week. If they know they want to look at a draft ordinance on Monday, you can post that the same time you post Friday's agenda.
Alder Badar?
One, yes, we can post 2 agendas if we already know. And actually, I would encourage us as we think ahead of what, again, our timeline is and when we want to take what up to kind of put them on the agenda. We can always change and modify an agenda, which is, if we want to add or modify it. So that's one thought. But I was going to mention that I also think that having a draft and if possible, and our city attorneys, you can speak to that. But if we can create a chapter that has all of this, including the independent monitor in the same chapter, I think that would be the best way for future to have it all part of the same structure in literally the same structure in our ordinances. So if we could think of that, I think that I'm also very much so do not want to revisit and hash the conversation that was had at the ad hoc committee. I realize that we have a huge amount of documentation in front of us right now, but many of that are things that honestly were part of the conversations of the ad hoc committee that led them to their recommendation. Maybe not the exact document, but similar documents, and some of them the same. So anyway, so I think having a draft would be great. And I do think that the one thing that I would be looking for is what is it that we shouldn't have in ordinance that we want to have in kind of more of the guidelines or processes that you feel shouldn't be like maybe embedded in an ordinance, but should be other documents. So I'm thinking, for example, the process for selection of the members of the oversight, like how much detail goes into an ordinance and how much of it is like that as a process that And I don't, maybe it's all in the ordinance. I don't know that. I'm just looking for advice about, again, how much detail do we go in an ordinance? For example, there are organizations we have to define in the membership of the oversight. I don't know that we want the organizations named in the ordinance, because then, anytime we want to change them, we will have to change the ordinance, or maybe that's a good idea. I'm not in a circle right now to say that.
I have a quick question, kind of piggybacking on that. Determination of where this item goes in the ordinances. Don't we have to decide where this position is going to be housed? Or no?
Yeah, that would be one part of the ordinance. I think what Alder Badar was saying is having a separate chapter in the ordinance, like, I don't know, I think we're up to 41 or 40.
We're on 42 now.
So 43.
This would be 42.
This would be 42. So a separate chapter just addressing this. Was that what you were saying, Alder Badar?
Correct. Like we would have a chapter that's really about oversight.
Police oversight.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sorry, I didn't take my turn to respond, Alder Moreland. Right?
Oh, no. Go.
And the reason is because I think it makes it cleaner to have it a standalone, and over time there will be potentially changes and amendments to that chapter. And one thing I've learned is that if it's just sits mixed in something else, it becomes harder to keep track of the entire ordinance.
And I would just say, Alder Moreland, that it can have its own chapter regardless of where its
house
financial home ends up being. Because that whatever ordinance that is can reference the new 42.
Okay.
All right, chapter 42 it is.
I think, Mike looks like he might have something to say there.
Thanks. That's fine. The other option, just so you know what the options are, chapter 5 is the police department and police regulations chapter. That's a 11-page chapter at this point. That would be the other, I guess, natural place to look for this type of ordinance.
So maybe you could give us options. Just, do some more thinking about it so you can explain what, how that would work to us, whether it's a 42 or part of 5. And something that we can, discuss amongst ourselves.
I probably just made Marcy and John's job more complicated by suggesting 2 alternatives, but there you go.
So, and I don't know whether this is a correct point to bring this up, but I wanted to ask Attorney Strange to kind of address some of the things we talked about earlier in the day about whether we want to include, I think it was the Director of Transportation, include a lot about the in the ordinance, or whether just have a short couple of paragraph description of it and then flesh out the job description somewhere else.
Yeah, we had talked just to try and sort of figure out the timeline and the possible work plans. Speakers mentioned this earlier. We have some positions like this in the ordinances where the job duties are spelled out very extensively and specifically. One example of that would be the Director of Transportation or the Director of Planning, Community and Economic Development. And then we have other positions like this where it's just a smaller ordinance creating the position, and then the actual job duties are primarily covered by the job description. And so I guess I'm assuming that you would want the job duties in the ordinance, but that would be one thing that would help us, I guess, draft this over the next week, is to address that issue at some point, either during this item or the next one.
I think in as far as they're spelled out in the recommendation, we want that information in the ordinance.
Okay.
Alder Badar? Oh, your hand's down. Okay. Okay, so I guess kind of as a recap on this, we want the city attorneys to come up with a draft ordinance based on what's in the ad hoc committee recommendations. We want included in there the recommendations, I guess, in the detail that it's listed in the ad hoc report in the ordinance. We want more options, or at least a couple of options as to where this is to be placed in the ordinance, either Chapter 5 or Chapter 42. And I think we come up with a calendar based on when we receive the ordinance. Is that what you were referring to, Alder Kimball? Once we get the ordinance to tell us kind of where we are and what has to happen in order for us to finish the work up?
Well, so the ordinance is just one piece, and I think we should talk about sequencing the rest of the pieces and then figuring out what's reasonable given the time frame. So, we got 1 week for a draft of the ordinance. Then we have job descriptions of the independent monitor. I think a lot of the questions raised by Mr. Yudice around processes around comprising the civilian oversight board. We should come up with recommendations for that for the Common Council. And then we need to dig into the budgetary issues, looking at will this Office of the Independent Monitor have a full-time investigator on staff? What will be the financial requirements to support that office, and the well-functioning and training and ongoing training of the Civilian Oversight Board, and then figure out budget amendments to present to council around that. So to me, that's the sequence, but we need to figure out, should we be working on those things, all of them simultaneously, and they just shake out at different time frames? Should we focus intensely on, just one thing after another? What should we do? So I think that's, it's a lot. It's a lot, and it's a lot of work for staff. It's a lot of work for us. And we need to figure it out.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back to Attorney Strange. So once the draft ordinance, once that's brought back to us and we kind of go through it and say, you're on point, or you left this out, or whatever the situation is, that could inform us of the job description, correct? So we would need to get HR involved, work on the job description. And then regarding the processes for comprising the oversight board, if there's anything to me that's going to take the longest, that's going to be the part that's going to take the longest, because we want to reach out to people to make recommendations, nominations for people to be on there. We have to decide how many people we're talking about being on there. There were a lot of a request for different, contingencies to be a part of this. But I guess I want to make sure that we don't create an unwieldy board that doesn't, really get a lot done just by virtue of the size. So I'm wondering if Karen or Attorney Strange or somebody could give us some ideas of what a typical oversight board size is, or is there one?
Well, I think I think that the resolution creating this work group was pretty specific as to the makeup of the board, as the recommendations in the ad hoc. And so I think in drafting the ordinances, we'll probably use that as a guideline for makeup of the board. But again, we have several ordinances that deal with larger boards in terms of numbers. Some have 9, some have 7, some have 11. Some are comprised of all voting members. Some have a couple alternates. Those are little issues that you can discuss when you get the draft. And then those provisions also include the specifics of who those 9 or 11 people are going to be. We have ordinances that talk about certain qualifications for certain members. And, we'll do our best in drafting the ordinance to input what we see in the resolution into the ordinance. And then maybe as we'll talk in a little bit, you'll see there are some examples from other cities that we could look at just for reference to see how they've constructed those sections. But I mean, typically those sections do require a lot of discussion, but the drafting of them is not particularly complicated. It's really just thinking about who are they going to be and how practical is that. And we've had these discussions with a variety of other boards and commissions. There's a lot of things to go into whether or not you're going to be able to find the people that are being described, and there's all kinds of things to discuss. But in putting it down in writing won't be too difficult.
Alders?
I think the one thing in the drafting, Attorney Strange, that would be good is in places where it's, those things that are not really, they're decisions, right? Decision point. Like, is it 13 member or is it 15? Is it a 3-year term or is it a 6-year term, right? If we could maybe make sure in the drafting that it doesn't seem like when you're drafting it, you've already told us what to, because I think for the members of the public, it's hard to know that the people may react immediately to they said 13 and we want it to be 15. So maybe it's even an XX, and just to underlining and highlighting it as these are points of conversation. So both the public knows that that's a good place to provide if there is any strong feelings one way or another. And for us to also know that that's literally a policymaker decision-making point that we need to discuss. So just a suggestion, because I know people, when you see it in writing, you kind of tend to react to that draft being the
Final. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, we can leave that blank.
Okay. Alder Kimball?
Attorney Haas has his hand up.
Yes, he did. Attorney Haas?
Sorry about that. Thank you. Along those lines, it would be, if we're asking our staff to draft an ordinance, it would be nice to know if you would like to call this position monitor or auditor, since both terms are floating around. And this along the same lines, but maybe requiring more thorough discussion later on, is whether the oversight body is going to be a board or a committee. There's a distinction in the ordinances there, and I think at some point that should be discussed as well. But it would be better if we knew if it was going to be at least an auditor or monitor, so we could at least use a proper terminology without our office being the ones that people think have decided that.
So, Alders, do we want to discuss that now? Do we want to wait until Friday?
Does the recommendation say auditor?
Monitor.
I think it should say what it says in the recommendation. I think this is not a decision we're making, because the decision we collectively made was to adopt the language in the recommendations. So whatever is there, you should use.
Yeah, it says monitor.
Yeah.
Independent monitor. And my, to your question about the board, my inclination is board. And unless I hear otherwise from a discussion that was brought to us by city attorney for some reason, but my inclination is this should be a board. And again, I'm just going to go with the fact that it says Civilian Oversight Board in the recommendation. So, keeping it true to the recommendations.
I agree.
And this wasn't a committee that was using words randomly. I can assure you.
Oh, right. The only reason I bring it up.
It all came after a lot of thinking.
No, I understand, but the only reason I bring it up is we do have an ordinance in the books that says the distinction is that a committee has authority to make recommendations. And it seems so far, at least, that seems to be the consensus, is that the oversight board is going to be making recommendations. And I don't know if the ad hoc committee was aware of that distinction or not, or whether it was discussed. So if that's the direction, that's fine. We just want to make sure that the council is aware of what the ordinances currently say about that distinction.
What's the difference with the board? What rights do boards have?
Board is defined as a subunit that is given some independent power to make determinations on behalf of the city of Madison. The committee is any subunit other than a board or commission, and generally is limited to making recommendations or reports to the mayor or common council or some other body unless explicitly empowered otherwise. Any subunit called task force, work group, or similar name is a committee.
Well, can you, so any decision, are there any decisions that boards make that the common council can't be appealed to? That the board is the final word and there's no appeal to the council?
There are a few, like the Zoning Board of Appeals goes directly to circuit court. It's just a easy one that comes to mind. Maybe not many, but that's one example.
But most boards, any of their determinations can be appealed to council? For most of our...
I mean, the definition says it's given independent power to make determinations on behalf of the city.
Hmm.
Can I ask is Dr. Gelem still on the call?
Yes, he is.
Can I ask him to share his thoughts?
The ad hoc committee really did not think about the distinction between committee and board as it's currently in Madison ordinance. And like the policy making stuff is a really important component of what this entity would be doing. So that has to be given some consideration. But I haven't had adequate time to really look and think about, whether it should be, board or committee. But Attorney Strange's comment made me think that, there is an argument to be made for committee. That's all.
Okay. Alder Kimball?
Just a question for Greg. So you referenced the policy oversight is important in how the ad hoc committee, viewed or envisioned this board.
Right.
In your discussions, did you talk about this board being able to recommend policy directly to MPD or recommend to the council to adopt? And then it would cover MPD.
It would actually play both roles because, I think most of the recommendations will be directly to MPD, and hopefully MPD may then adopt those recommendations. But there's also the council decision-making authority and the power to issue lawful orders. So I would say both.
So the question is then, there would be the board would make they would make decisions, but they would be the kind of decisions that are just recommendations. They wouldn't be the decisions that could make law.
Correct.
So that, in your opinion, Attorney Haas, would that still put this body in the territory of committee?
Well, I mean, that's what it seems like to me. I mean, if anything we've learned over the last 2 weeks is that everybody seems to be on the same page that this is going to be a body that does not, for instance, encroach on the authority of the PFC. It's going to make recommendations and so forth. You can call it a board if you want to. I'm only pointing out that according to the ordinance and the discussion I've heard so far, it sounds to be more like a committee.
Alder Badar?
I'm not convinced yet. I can always be convinced of anything, but the one reason that I want, and maybe this is I'm visual, so maybe this is like a diagram for me. But the reason is because I also see, although they're not telling the PFs, they're not encroaching, there is still communication that clearly is outlined that goes to the PFC. Bypassing the council, which I'm totally fine with as a council member. So I do feel that it is a board in that sense. Like for me, for committees, everything comes to council. Nothing goes outside that closed loop. And it feels to me that there is a loop that comes to council, and then there is a loop that goes to PFC, and potentially a loop of, I don't know. So I'm just kind of putting that out there. That's the reason that in my mind, I was thinking board, I can. So I would also say we don't need to decide that word right now, potentially. I think that it's like, let's get the form, like the content that tells us what it does and all of that. And based on when we agree on all of that, which again, it's written in the ad hoc committee's recommendation, so it shouldn't take us much to agree to that language, then we can go back and say, okay, now we're clear that it should be called committee or board. So that's
Alder Kimball, just to refresh your recollection, you probably remember when we were doing the Transportation Policy and Planning Board, we called that a board. It does not have independent authority that's currently constructed, but it did up until like the third substitute. Right at the end, we removed the authority to adopt plans without council approval. And I think by that point, we were so engrossed in it being a board, we just left it.
Yeah.
But that's the other example I can think of.
And I guess my 2 cents is, I guess I'm a stickler for the definitions. And if it's clearly spelled out what the role and responsibilities are of a board versus a committee, I would lean toward what the clearly defined definitions are, which may in the future be, revisited. But I guess I'd like to ask Dr. Glembiek, how big a deal do you think the wording is? In your perspective, I know you're just one person of the entire committee.
I'm just one person, and I haven't given it adequate thought. So I'm loath to say anything right now. It may not be that important, but I'm not sure.
Well, I agree with Alder Bedard that we don't have to decide it right now, but getting it out there on everybody's radar to get people thinking about it, I think is important to do at this particular point, because I don't think we want to get stuck on the word board or committee. We really want the meat of the ordinances to be what we reflect on. Okay. Do we have any more discussion about this timeline? So what I have is 1 week for the draft ordinance. Then we work on the job description, which hopefully the ordinance will inform us about, which hopefully won't take a lot of time. We'll work with HR to try to flesh that out. Then the process is for comprising oversight board. I would think 2 weeks. Now I defer to my more informed colleagues here, because to me it's kind of loaded, and that's going to be the one thing that people are going to look at, how we go about this. So I defer to you at this point.
That seems right. And then there's the budget amendments, and at that point, I think we need to start bringing finance staff in on the discussion, or I guess as soon as we have come to a general idea about the makeup of this office, we need to be bringing finance staff in to help us figure out the budget issues.
Okay. And then the training. I think the organization that Mr. Yudice brought up will be a really good resource for that, because I actually signed up for a training that they're having this Thursday. So, yeah. So I don't anticipate that that's going to be a super heavy lift, because I think there's resources out there that are already established. But the process for the composition of the oversight board, how we're going to get people nominated, if that's what's going to happen, who's going to confirm them, is it the mayor? I mean, but all of that. Alder
That
Bedar?
is the one that is outlined, actually, it says the mayor and the common
Well-
council, just like any committee, I mean, again, in the report. But I think, what's the process, is there an application, is it just names that are put forward, which organizations are the ones under the $1 million? That is definitely work that needs, I think, broad input, to be honest, by the community. I don't.
Okay, anything else on this agenda item? Did I recap that pretty efficiently or sufficiently? Okay, so we're going to move on to agenda item 7.
We do have 3 registrants on 7, 1 wishing to speak in support. Tyson Vitale.
Mr. Vitale?
Things have already been brought up by the current members that I don't feel like I need to waste any more time. So thank you. I'm good.
So I guess my question is, how do we go about identifying the organizations that fit the criteria as outlined in the report? And anybody that was on the committee, if you have ideas, you're welcome to speak.
So I think at the very least, people and groups who had participated in the ad hoc process, so maybe groups that were represented on the ad hoc committee, groups or people who came to the ad hoc committee to give input on a regular basis. And I guess we can check in with the co-chairs about who those people were.
Should we, once we get, I guess, an initial list of people who participated in the ad hoc work, we still need to make sure that everyone that has a stake in all of this coming to fruition has been reached out to as well.
Yeah, so obviously MPD.
Yeah, and the $1 million threshold. What is the? I guess what is the significance of that versus the composition? Alder Bedar?
The significance of that was that the committee wanted to make sure that the smaller organizations that oftentimes are not in systems, the organizations that get a seat at the table are the organizations that are more grassroots, that are smaller, are widely represented on the oversight.
Okay.
So it was very definitely with that intent.
And Karen, I don't want to put anything additional on your plate, and I'll work on it as well, but to try to come up with a list, because I'm sure that it is, and I've tried my best to go through the entire report, but I'm sure that there are references to who participated in this. If we could get kind of a list of who participated, the groups that participated in this process, I think that would be helpful.
I think I can reach out to the co-chairs, the committee members, to get a list started.
Yeah. And it might even be in the executive summary of the report, some of those groups. Alder Bedar?
I will highly recommend the co-chairs. I mean, they will let you know. They were very regular.
The co-chairs? Okay.
Yeah, the co-chairs. I think that's
Keith Finley and Tom Brown?
correct.
Okay.
So, and then MPD and the PFC members.
Okay.
And then I've heard that there's a number of other organizations, and this was certainly in the paper yesterday, that have a series of demands that have to do with changing policing. There are like different organizations. There was like the Black Leadership Council, and there was the youth group. So I think
Urban Triage, Freedom Inc.
correct.
Some of those groups, yeah.
And then there is
Okay.
it's not working very well. Impact. And so I think just reaching out specifically to those groups. I have heard that some of that series of kind of like demands were sent to the mayor's office, and I've requested that those be forwarded to us, to all alders, but specifically to us, because I do think it's within the purview of our role to like be looking at how does that all match with the work that we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Impact Demand is the group.
Yeah, and also, I mean, if there are people in organizations actively being active in this moment around this topic, they should be informed that this work is happening and what the opportunities for participating in it are.
Okay. So Karen, you'll work on a list from the report. I think it'll be easy enough to get a list of other organizations. Just again, with what's going on in the community, I'm sure that it'll be easy enough to get some additional groups, and I think we'll be able to take a look at it on Friday. You think? Okay. Okay. Anything else on this agenda item, Shiva?
I would say to get and thank you, Alderman, like not only the list, but if you can find out if there is like one contact person, I do think it may be appropriate for the chair to
reach out,
send an email to that contact person for the organization and say, we want to invite you to participate.
Okay, I agree. Okay. Alder Kimball, anything additional?
Nope, I think that covers it.
Okay. Moving on to agenda item 8, review other cities' independent auditor ordinance language. And I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Strange.
We do have two registered. Yes,
okay.
That both would like to speak. Gregory Gelem, either in support or opposed.
Dr. Columbia?
Hello. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things, and before I get to the meat of it, just given prior discussion. Most of the groups that participated with the ad hoc committee, specifically those that gave presentations to the ad hoc committee, are all listed in that report. So that can be extracted from there. There were a few other groups that didn't give formal presentations, but that came and interacted at points. And I really like everything that all the alders had to say around bringing in, groups. And Alder Bedard was exactly right. The 1 million was about making sure that you have inclusion of the smaller, more grassroots groups, and not just like the establishment heavyweights. As Louise said, for the Oversight Committee, the training is going to be critical for credibility, for making good decisions. And Nicole is going to be potentially a wonderful resource. Like, one thing that police oversight professionals have told me is, like, you want to have independent training. You don't want to have, you don't want to rely on the police department for the training, because that tends to generate regulatory capture. Another thing that was touched on, where this is housed, it's important that it be fully independent, and like there's a consensus in the field of police oversight that that's really important. Getting to the core topic of this item, the ordinances, what Keith Finley thought made sense, and I actually tend to agree with him, potentially starting from the Denver ordinance, because we use that to some degree as a template, though there are also sharp deviations from that, but using that as potentially a template for the independent monitor, for the ordinance construction around the independent monitor. And then constructing de novo language or bringing in elements from other ordinances where needed. And like Newark, there's a lot more similarity for the composition of the Civilian Oversight Board. And at Newark, those organizations are hard coded into the ordinance, but that doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be that way. Like it can either be hard coded into the ordinance, or you can have some kind of mechanism, created in the ordinance where the civic organizations are not hard coded in. But yeah, like Denver will actually give you a lot of the basis potentially for construction of ordinance around the independent monitor. But you'll have to look elsewhere more for in some of the other ordinances for the oversight board. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And we have Tyson Vitale.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I will just be really quick. Just going over for if we're talking about the independent auditor ordinance language, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Just going over that, I think it's really that language is incredibly crucial and important, which I'm sure you all already know. And I'm just, just to make sure, please to be cognizant again, which I'm sure you already are, of making sure that the requirements or the language in there isn't putting in place where basically someone from law enforcement has to be in that position, or someone who, again, is going to come from a viewpoint and perspective that has been shown is not going to be effective in actually, having the accountability and civilian oversight that we need. And my worry is coming from the initial description put forth by the mayor, and that just being incredibly, just looking into it, seeming like it made sense and seeming like, at face value on the surface that it was something that was reasonable, but was not. So, yep, that's it. Sorry, I won't take up any more of your time. Sorry, I wasn't more prepared. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the registrants? Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Attorney Strange to discuss the ordinances and how we can go about looking at, I guess, not recreating the entire wheel. And I know that the ad hoc report gives us the kind of the blueprint for how to do this. But there are other ordinances which have been also pointed out by Dr. Gelem and Mr. Vitale that we need to take a look at. So I'm turning it over to you, Attorney Strange. And you're muted. There you go.
All right, there we go. And Marcy's on the call too, so she might want to unmute at some point. But just given the conversation so far regarding just wanting to get a draft and sort of, I don't think it probably makes a ton of sense to just pull up these ordinances and go through them provision by provision. But I did want to just kind of share a little bit about what we've been doing to try and wrap our heads around this. I was going to share, if I can work the share screen situation here, just look briefly at the Denver ordinance, but then at a spreadsheet that Marcy took a stab at putting together sort of initial draft of something that might be helpful for the group as you do consider what we draft. So I'm going to try and share.
You should be able to now, John.
Yeah. So this is the Denver ordinance that was just mentioned. And I don't think it's necessary to go through every single one of these. Obviously, we'll use this as we go through the ad hoc recommendations to create the Madison ordinance. But just the way that it's generally set up, it starts with the Office of the Independent Monitor, talks about how it's created, talks about appointment and removal of monitor and staff. And as you read through and you kind of go down through, as you get to the bottom, it transitions into the duties of the monitor's office. So those issues that have mandatory oversight, those that have discretionary oversight, that section right there. And then it talks about reporting and sets out requirements and sort of processes for reporting. Then it goes into confidentiality and a few other provisions. But then sort of hidden down here at the bottom, you'll see it's the start of the oversight board. So kind of all in the same section, like you've been talking about the functions of the board, the creation of the board, nomination, those kinds of things. And obviously we'll take what's in the ad hoc recommendations and use this as a template to create one for Madison. And then what we were thinking is that it may be helpful to sort of compare and contrast, almost like a menu. So Marcy put together a draft sort of conceptual spreadsheet of what this would look like with a variety of different cities in it. So we have Denver, Portland, Syracuse, Newark, and then space over here for other cities that we might want to add. And then sort of compare those to what's in the ad hoc report recommendation. We obviously sort of thought about this prior to the assignment of actually drafting the ordinance in the next week. So I'm not sure we'll come back on Friday with a complete 100% spreadsheet because we might be working on the ordinance. But I think as you go through the ordinance once it's drafted, potentially being able to look at these different sections and rows, kind of compare and contrast what the different ordinances do. So, an example is specific duties. Marcy listed out all of the duties that are part of the board for those particular ordinances. And I kind of wanted to show this just to see if you think that this would be helpful. Something like this would be helpful. And if you think that it would be helpful, we can continue to develop it. If not, of course, we could spend our time on other things. So that's sort of one, how we'll review the ordinance as we go forward. And then the thing that I'd share is several people today have mentioned the OLE group, and this is now part of the Legistar file. We're in contact today with the past president of the group, and they are providing publishing a paper in August, he said, that will contain a ton of data for different bodies across the country. Spreadsheet contains a bunch of different information, thing from budget information to specific issues that sort of have come up tonight regarding things like oversight. They also collect information from the places themselves about how they do things and it's a very, very data filled spreadsheet. And I think this could be helpful just again as you're considering the draft ordinance that we produce, to see what other cities have done and are doing, questions that you're struggling with considering now. So that is in the Legistar file. It is the disclaimer that this is the intellectual property of the Nicole, and so he wanted to make sure that I made everybody aware of that they're sort of sharing it with us because it's not going to be officially public until probably August. But I told him that we had a sort of a tight deadline, and he was willing to share that. So that's kind of a general overview of, I think, the ordinances that we'll be looking at when we draft the ordinance. If you think it would be helpful to now, in detail the Denver ordinance, we could do that. But I feel like we kind of have our marching orders back to this first draft.
Alder Kimball?
Yeah, thank you so much for doing that, Marcy. I think it's an excellent tool. We did something like that with the surveillance work group, looking at different surveillance ordinances. And I think most of the work on that is, that spreadsheet is done. And when you give us the draft, we will have the draft on the one hand and this spreadsheet on the other that we can really compare. I mean, I would say if you have time to sort of break down what's in the draft and put it in the spreadsheet, fine. But I think we can also, do that work ourselves in our minds as we're reviewing. So I would say that, the priority is to get that draft done. But that is excellent information in the way it's presented. Really great. Thank you, Marcy.
Mm-hmm.
Alder Badar? Are you?
I have nothing to add. So for once,
Okay.
I once in a while I can keep quiet.
So from my perspective, I think it would be helpful, but to Alder Kimball's statement, I think the first column was to go through the ad hoc committee's report and put in the information of the recommendations from them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, definitely that spreadsheet is not anywhere near a final piece of work. It was just a concept to see if it was going to be something that you thought would be helpful. So the idea would be to put, the equivalent recommendations of the ad hoc in that first column so you can compare them to the other ones. And then, of course, you'll have the draft to look at to sort of decide if there's another way it's been done that you might want to consider. We can leave a blank, like we've done with other budgets. We can leave a blank column for you to take notes in or draft what was decided. Work group.
That would be helpful for me because for me, it would kind of create a checklist to make sure we've not missed anything from the report.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that, we're asking a lot of you guys in just a short amount of time. So whatever is easiest for you to do. I mean, we could, if the rest of the ordinances are in there and there's, you don't get a chance to fill out the first column, then I think we can figure it out from the draft ordinance. So it's,
I mean, I think I can get the ad hoc in there because I know it now, so I can just add it in.
Yeah.
Or like ordinance, that should be a problem.
okay. So timing on that would be the same as timing on the draft ordinance?
Yeah, I think that's, there's that's realistic. And I would say on the time, I don't know if the plan is definitely to meet on Monday, a week from Monday. One of the issues with the draft is, of course, it's nice to get it in Legistar so people can take a look at it before the meeting. So we'll get it in as quickly as we can. I don't know if we, on Tuesday, that gives people an extra day to take a look at it whenever we get it in there. But yeah, I would think both we could try to get in at the same time, and we might just leave the spreadsheet as a kind of working draft for everybody as we go through.
Okay. Well, any other? Go ahead, Karen. Go ahead, Karen.
You have one late registrant. So when you're ready.
I think we're ready.
Yes, we have Amelia Royko Maurer in support and registered to speak for number 4 public comment.
Okay. Amelia, you're live.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I just want to, in case anyone needs reminding, share that there's a list of incidents right now that are reminding us every day as to why really strong independent monitor and civilian oversight board is needed. The past 2 weeks, I haven't even been there in person, and it's just blown my mind. Not only what's taken place with MPD, but also the process by which they're handling things and how the lack of transparency. It's just unbelievable. So I commend you, and I just again encourage you to make sure that this is as strong as possible. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Any other registrants, Karen?
I'll refresh one more time just to make sure.
I don't see any, but
You don't see any new. Okay.
No.
Yeah. You refreshed faster than I did. Okay.
Okay, so just want to touch bases with my colleagues. Anything you want to add before we move to adjourn?
Just thanks to everyone for all of your work, IT, City Attorney's Office, our chair. I know you've put in hours and hours of work on this already, and we really appreciate it. And we look forward to really getting this done for the city.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, we're one step closer.
Adjournment.
You have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Unanimous. Thanks to everyone who participated.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.